Okay, so the new BittBoy is here, and though it's not perfect yet, it's pretty awesome. Okay, so the guys over at BittBoy hooked me up with the new model, and before getting to that, I gotta say, I've missed you guys quite a bit. If you follow me on social media, you know why I've been away from YouTube in the last little while. I've been victim of a horrible migraine that has lasted a good 6 or 7 days at this point. I'm not 100% over it just yet. I've been to the doctor, I got all checked out, I'm fine, everything's good. They chalked it up to stress, I guess. But we're so close to 100,000 and I miss doing these videos for you. So even though I'm not 100% just yet, kind of like this new BittBoy if you think about it, I had to jump in and just do a quick thing here. So because of that, this video is going to be just a hands-on. I'm not going to do a super in-depth review. This is going to be coming later. But I still wanted to show you what these guys have came up with. I might as well take off my hospital band here. Here we go. And we're off. Alright, quick little recap for those who are new here. This is the original BittBoy. It's basically an NES-on-a-chip. It doesn't support save states. You can't load your own ROMs, even though it has a little microSD slot here at the top. It's a nice little novelty, but for somebody like me, it's not that interesting. So, after that, BittBoy put out the new BittBoy, which is, this time, as opposed to just being an NES on a chip, this one is an actual proper emulator. I'm not sure if you can see the screen really well there. Brightness is all the way down. So it emulates NES, Game Boy, and Game Boy Color. So I'm gonna pick whatever here just to bring up the brightness a little bit so I can show you. I did a full review of this guy here. This thing is phenomenal. If you're only looking for NES, Game Boy, and Game Boy Color emulation, this thing is the one to get. It's pretty awesome. But people wanted a little bit more, so BittBoy did exactly that. This is the new BittBoy version 2. Basically, this thing can be flashed with custom firmware, and that allows you to emulate a lot more systems. There was one in particular I was most interested in, and that's GBA. Because if this emulates GBA well, that means that in a very portable form factor that reminds me of the original DMG, I can have the entire Game Boy library. Now, I have to give you a little disclaimer. What you're about to see here is work in progress. This custom firmware is not finished. It's not ready for prime time by BittBoy's own admission. And in fact, they didn't want to send me one just yet because they didn't want you to think that this reflects the final product. I told them I'm going to explain to them that this is not ready. This is just a beta version, if you will, of the custom firmware. I just can't wait to get my hands on it. My viewers have been asking me to talk about it. So just send me one. I want to show it to them, and I'll make sure to let them know that this is not ready just yet. So keep that in mind when I show you some of the shortcomings here. So this is the new BittBoy. For those who are familiar with emulation, you will recognize that this is running a version of Dingox, which I'm not sure if this thing is charged, but let's take a look here. This is the Dingo A320. It's an old Chinese emulation machine. Oh, here you go. And it runs Dingox. It was my first experience with this operating system. I booted it wrong. Wait a second, let's try that again. I gotta turn this thing off, hold select, and then turn it on. This was really neat, mostly for GBA emulation for the form factor, and it was pretty much the only system that it ran really well. So as you can see, it looks very similar to what the BittBoy is running right now, and it emulates pretty much the same things. So this is kind of cool. So I'm going to show you here the menu first. We have DOSBox, though DOSBox emulation, you know, work in progress. NES, which at this point, I don't think anybody is really that excited about emulating NES games. I hope the die-hard NES fans aren't offended by that. Neo Geo here, GBA, which is the one I'm most interested in, Game Boy and Game Boy Color. This I'm not super hot on because this already did such a great job at emulating Game Boy and Game Boy Color that I'm like, okay, whatever. You have WonderSwan here, PlayStation 1, Sega Mega Drive, or the Sega Genesis for the North Americans, the Master System, the SNES, Stella, which is an Atari 2600 emulator, as you can see by the icon, and the PC Engine. Now, the first question you might be wondering is, well, how can it emulate SNES if it only has 4 buttons? And yes, there's nothing here in the back. Nothing here on the top, nothing at the bottom, nothing on the sides. This only has a D-pad and 4 action buttons. So right off the top, you won't be able to play games that use L and R. Now, the good news is there are a lot of SNES games that didn't really use those buttons at all. Like, for instance, Donkey Kong Country is one that comes to mind. Donkey Kong Country 2, for instance, used L and R, but it was kind of pointless because they only did one function, which was already covered by the A button. So there are quite a few SNES games that you would be able to play on this limited form factor without L and R. So let's take a look here. GBA is the main thing I wanted to see running on this. So let's boot this up, and there's a list of ROMs here. So let's try, I don't know, Aria of Sorrow, which is the first Castlevania game I beat. So it boots up. I'm gonna turn up the volume here. So this one doesn't indicate when the volume is going up and down, as opposed to like with the original BittBoy. When you do that, let me turn it on here for a second. That's a little too loud. Here we go. So the original BittBoy, that's one of the main differences. Let me just load up whatever here. Just okay, here we go. Burger Time Deluxe. So that's the first difference, right? Like when you lower the volume, there's a visual indicator there to show that the volume is being lowered or increased, and same for the brightness controls. If you weren't a fan of that, they did away with that in this version of the custom firmware. So as you can see, it goes dark, it goes brighter, it goes louder, and it goes quieter, but no visual indication of that happening. Now, if that's better or worse, you be the judge of that. The other thing here on the hardware side of things is that for some reason, and I'm not sure why they changed this, the buttons start and select here on the original new BittBoy are a little mushy, whereas on the new one, they're kind of clicky. Can you hear that? So one thing that concerned me at first too is that, I'll show you here on the new one, I was having some trouble with save data. So let's start here, game start, select data, and there's my game. I'm going to show it to you here. So there's Izzy. I played for what? Just about 8 minutes just trying it out. So it's saving the data there natively. That's one thing the original new BittBoy didn't do, if you remember that. It has save states, but it didn't do native saves. Like if you go in, say, Castlevania and go into the little shrine and you save the game there, if you were to do that in a game or on the original new BittBoy, it's kind of silly to keep saying that, it wouldn't actually save the game. So this is great news because it actually supports native saves, and it also has save states. So if I go into load state from slot 0, it takes me right to the shrine where I last saved. Now here's where the bad news begin. I'm not sure if it's a quirk of the emulator that's not fully baked yet, like I mentioned in the beginning, work in progress, or if it's something that the ROMs are doing. Some games will save and some games will not. I'm not sure why. There's no rhyme or reason to it. Some games will save, the majority of them will save, but I've seen a few where it won't save, so that's a problem. Like Mario Kart Super Circuit for the GBA won't save for some reason. So so that's a problem, right? The other thing, let me turn up the volume just a bit. The other thing, and this is something that was present on the original, I was pressing the wrong button here. This is something that, maybe I should turn it down a bit. This is something that was present on the original BittBoy. Let me pause this here. So if you remember, the original BittBoy had a volume meter here on the side, and on the new BittBoy, and both the original and the new BittBoy, you had to hold select and then press A and B to increase or lower the volume, and or the turbo button to increase and lower the screen brightness. The problem is that that will effectively be a select button press. So when you're trying to increase the volume here, let me show you here what happens. So here's the problem, right? Like if I go to lower or increase the volume, it's a select button press. So that's a bit annoying, right? The trick around that is to pause the game and then do it. But obviously, you know, if the pause menu in the game that you're playing has a function for the select key, the problem's still present. Now, the next problem is a little hard to get around. This, I'm not a hardware guy. I don't know anything about the hacking process, really. I've been following the discussion on the Discord where people are talking about it and stuff like that. So I just have this cursory knowledge of what's going on. But basically, watch what happens if I try to press right A and B at the same time. Watch this. See? That triggers a select press. I'm going to show you again. Let's get out of there. Whoops, select. So right, A and B, select. This is what the community is referring to as ghost key. And from what they can tell, this is a hardware issue. So this is a problem, apparently, that will not be able to be addressed in changing the firmware. Again, this is what the hackers are saying. I'm not a hacker myself, and this is very work in progress, so I can't tell you one way or another, but that's what they're saying. Go skiing, like you're seeing here, is a hardware problem that likely will not be able to be addressed via software. That's a bit of a bummer. It's not present in a lot of games, but I noticed that and it does bug me. Other than that, the emulation is really nice and smooth. The screen, they maintain the same quality as the older model. So this is really, really nice. The community is very active, and there have been some new versions of the firmware. They're working to improve this thing, and it's likely that by the time this video is out, the version of the firmware is actually better than what I'm using here. So that's nice. I like that there's a very active community working to improve this thing. And I'm a big fan of this form factor. I'm a big fan of what they're trying to do here. A tiny little Game Boy that runs so many. I'm going to save this here. Let's save that. So go to save and save. Now, the other thing is this emulator, this GB emulator, like I was saying, it wasn't saving quite right sometimes for some ROMs apparently. What the folks at BitBoy told me is to go into save state options and then save here. So I'm gonna save here, save to the current slot. Okay, so that's saved. Let's go back. Oh no, it's still saving. Yeah, it's saved now. Let's go back and return to game. So that's the proper way of saving. Not on this part here, right? Which it'll still work for most of the ROMs, but they said the proper way to save at this point in this custom firmware, in this version of the GB emulator, is going to save state options and then saving it there. Let me exit this emulator here. I'm going to show you some other stuff. Now, one thing that I really liked, I was a big fan of in the Game Boy emulator. Let's go with my favorites. Burger Time Deluxe, that's one of my favorites. This is something that I really like about this emulator. So as you can see, it has a green filter that simulates what the original Game Boy actually looked like. What's interesting is that that was already present in the box of the original new BitBoy, but the original new BitBoy, as you can see here, didn't have that kind of filter. It's just monochromatic, like if you were playing it on a Game Boy Pocket. Some people like that. I really do like the filter. I do like that look, like the original pea soup green. There are other options here. If you go into, let's say here, main setting, I believe it is. No, not main setting. It's a video settings. You go into video settings, and then there's the layer, and there's the different filters. That one is DMG dark. There's DMG medium. There's GB Pocket gray. So that's nice. Now the problem is, look at that. That looks super nice. I love that. I love that to play Burger Time like I was playing it on an original DMG. I really, really like that. Now, the problem is, if you see here, let's try to load state. And there is a load state there. I'm going to load it there. Wait, did I do something wrong? Wait a second, load states. I might be pressing the wrong button here. Load states. Now you see, it's not responding to the D-pad. I'll press start and nothing happened. I'll press A and nothing seems to happen because it dropped me right back into where I was in the game. Let me try to reset I'm gonna reset the game here, and let's try loading that again. So load state, as you can see, unfortunately, it seems to stop working when I try to load a game, which isn't always the case. I'm going to try to turn it off and on it again and see if that happens again. Alright, we're back. Let's try, let's go again with Burger Time Deluxe. Press the R, go into load state, and as you can see, the D-pad is not functioning. The action buttons here will work. So if I press, say, B here, well, B doesn't do anything, T doesn't do anything. This one is cancel, and this one will select, but it's not really doing anything to that save state. So that's a problem, right? Like, as I said in the beginning, this is the very first version of the custom firmware. They were aware there was a lot of issues, but as it stands right now, it's not quite a finished product just yet. I'm gonna try a different game just to see that it's not that ROM specifically. Let's try Balloon Kid. So let's skip ahead, single play, blah, blah, blah. I'm gonna save right here. And saved, theoretically. I'm gonna try to skip ahead. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so let's see. Such a charming game. So let's see, load state. It's saved right there. I'm gonna press. And yeah, so as you can see, it loaded where I say. I'm gonna try again. Load state, and it's loading just fine. So let me try to exit the emulator and see if that maintains the save. Load state. And this one is saving just fine. Burger Time, for some reason, seems to crash the save state feature. So hard to tell if it's a problem with the emulator or the ROM itself. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's the emulator's not fully baked yet, because I've never run into problems like that where one ROM would save and another wouldn't. So that's it right now. As it stands right now, the BittBoy is still being worked on. It's still a fine device if you want to use just the regular firmware, but if you're looking for the custom firmware that will allow you to run more emulators and has emulators with more features than the stock emulator that it comes with, I would say there's a lot of promise, but it's not ready just yet. I'll leave the link to the Discord where people are talking about the hacking effort and coding new emulators for it and all those things. The community is very active and they're very helpful. In fact, I need to upgrade this to the most recent version of the firmware, which I assume, since this is the very first one, fixes a lot of the issues that you guys saw there, but I just haven't had the time because, you know, being in the hospital and all. But this is the new BittBoy. It's not ready just yet, but it has the potential to be a much more awesome device than the original new BittBoy. And that's all the time I have for today. If you guys have any questions, make sure to ask in the comments down below. Follow me on social media. I'm very active over there, both Twitter and Instagram. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We're almost so close to 100,000 subscribers. You have no idea how psyched I am for that. Thank you so much for all the support. And that's all the time I have for today. I'm Izzy, and I'm done.